Hey there, greetings everybody, and welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So we're back here for Tuesday night's metal album for the week. So we've, not metal album, but we're doing metal tonight, which means I've picked a heavy metal band. This time around it is a past heavy metal band, an older metal band. And I alternate that with a band that's a newer metal band that's come out in the last 10 years. And then I do one with an older metal band that's older than 10 years. But I also alternate this show with What's New, which went last week. And so we're doing the metal band this week. We're doing the Scorpions. This is the reason I chose the Scorpions. The reason I chose to do the Scorpions was I wanted to do, of course, an older metal band for this show because it's the older week, but I wanted to do, my friend Ben asked me what are my 4 favorite metal bands, and he says, other than Sabbath, Iron Maiden, and Judas Priest, what would be your 4th band? And my answer to him is, geez, I don't really know. I don't know. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, this is a potential band that filled that spot. They could be number 4. Definitely could be number 4. I had a big affinity for them initially when I first got into them. When the Blackout album came in 1980, that's around the beginning when I started to expand out. And this was that was their first album, and then the album that came right after it, Love at First Sting, 4 years later. Was it 4 years later or 2 years later? Not sure. But anyways, yeah, I think it was 2 years later. It was 2 years later in 82. And so there was like those 2 big albums right away. And I really liked quite a bit of the tracks on them. So they could be my number 4 band. So that's the band I've chosen to do today. And again, I'm working with my new computer system here. As you can see, it's probably a lot better audio and video. It took me a while to get it to a point where I can understand actually how to use it. I'm not a computer genius, although I must say my computer skills have jumped exceptional over this last year from where they were. And I'm able to figure things out now where I never could before. And I think I was a little bit intimidated by using computers. And once I got over that, I began to realize as long as you stick to it, you'll figure it out. And that's where we are. So I don't have any props for this particular band. I do have one, but I don't really use that album or look into it, and we're not going to be talking too much about it today. We're going to be talking about other things to do with the Scorpions. Okay, so for me, I made notes on one section of the Scorpions' discography. So for me, they weren't always metal. They didn't start out that way. They were a hard rock band, and I think they went through a period where they were a little bit of a glam metal band, and then I kind of got out of them altogether after that period of time. So I decided that I was going to stick with the heavy metal stuff for this episode. And so I picked out from their 3rd studio album, which is In Trance, all the way to their, I guess this would be their 9th studio album called Love at First Sting. And so there are 7 studio albums that coincide with that period of time. I'll give you a brief history of them so you know where the Scorpions came from. Most people think of the Scorpions as a late 70s, early 80s band, but they actually go back to the 1960s, 65, I think, is when the first time that the term Scorpions was applied to a rock band. And formed in 1965 by Rudolf Schenker, the older brother of Michael Schenker. He formed the band. They played around, different people played with the band. And then I believe, I'm just going to refer to my notes here because it's a little bit complex here. They probably stayed that way for about 4 or 5 years when in 1970 they kind of that's when they really started to kind of kick off, when Michael Schenker, Rudolph's younger 16-year-old brother, and Klaus Meine, the longtime vocalist of the band, joined the group from another band. They were playing with a cover band, basically covering Zeppelin and some other stuff, but basically Zeppelin. And they were called Copernicus, and they joined the Scorpions. And then that's when the music started to become more Scorpion-like, and they actually won a music contest in which they recorded 2 videos, 2 singles, which were actually never released. Maybe they were released later on different compilations. I'm not sure. Anyways, then they released their debut album, Lonesome Crow, and at this point they were Wolfgang Disoni on drums, Lothar Heinberg, who was with the band prior to Michael Schenker joining, on bass, Michael Schenker on lead guitar, Rudolph on rhythm guitar, and Klaus Meine on vocals. So they decided they were going to tour this album, of course, which wasn't really that uncommon in the 70s. That's what you did. You made an album, you toured it. And they toured as the backup for a metal band or hard rock metal band from Britain called UFO. Yes, the same UFO. And during the tour, towards the end of the tour, Michael Schenker decided that he was going to leave the Scorpions and join UFO, which he did. And so this left the band without their lead guitar player, and they kind of disintegrated and broke up there at that point. But Rudolf Schenker wanted Klaus Meine to join the band as well, and he didn't really... Actually, it was Uli Roth. He tried to get Uli Roth to join them, but he didn't want to. He was happy with the band he was with, which was it Devon Road or Dawn Road? Dawn Road is what it was. Anyways, so after a bit of time, Rudolf Schenker decided that he'll join that band, so he auditioned for the band, and they accepted him in, and they also took Klaus Meine in, so you had 2 members of the Scorpions in this Dawn Road group. So after playing for a while, a bit together, they decided that since the Scorpions had already had a studio album, it made sense for them to capitalize on that because they were well liked in the German area. So they changed their name from Dawn Road to the Scorpions, and that's what they became. Even though there was more members of Dawn Road in the band than Scorpion members, that's what they decided to do, and that became the Scorpions band that kind of dominated early on, I guess is the best way to put it. So the band Dawn Road, Klaus Meine with Rudolf Schenker and Uli John Roth, or Uli Roth, whatever you want to call him, they played together, and then at some point during this working arrangement, Jürgen Rosenthal and H.M. Kirchning, who were also with Red Dawn, left the band. One left the band completely. The other one left for military service. Then after his military service, he actually went and joined Eloy. And they replaced both of those guys. They replaced the drummer with Jürgen Feder, and then he left and was replaced by Rudy Lerner in 1975. So that's a pretty much an early history of them. I'm not going to say too much. I just wanted to give a little bit of a history lesson on them, but not too much of one. So for me, the band's metal era kind of started with their 3rd studio album called In Trance. This is to me when the Scorpion sound that the more modern Scorpion, well, I don't know if it's modern anymore, but the more commercial sounding Scorpions began. It wasn't really commercial initially. They were still but they became a lot heavier at that point. They had passed that line between hard rock and heavy metal, and were at this point, I think, heavy metal. The album has several several really good tracks. Dark Lady, In Trance, Living and Dying. These are all, I think, the best tracks on the album. But they also had some heavy tracks too, like Robot Man. Just some really strong stuff on this. Lots of really good guitar stuff. Uli Roth is really, really talented, and I think the riffing that they did on it was fantastic. It's got that classic kind of Scorpion sound to it. The overall production and sound of the album is mediocre. It's not fantastic, but for the time period, it's pretty good. Then they came out with the first really kind of controversial album, which was Virgin Killer, in which they had a prepubescent, a girl that was under 13 years of age on the cover, nude, and they called it Virgin Killer. It got them a lot of prominence, but at the same time, it got banned. The album cover was banned in a lot of places, and they replaced it with just different covers, but covers of the band members, basically. But a strong album. I like this album, but one of the weaker of the pre-commercial era albums, I think. Not the best album, but definitely a good album. Picture Life, Catch the Train, and Polar Nights, I think, are all the best songs on the album, and they tend to be the actual harder songs on the album as well. The overall sound of this album is a little bit clearer than In Trance, I think. Not a ton clearer, but I think it's noticeable. If you listen to both albums back to back, you'll notice it's a little bit clearer, and production's a little better on this album. I think the album is a heavier album too, and rock's pretty solid rocking album. Then you get to the Taken by Force, which is the next studio album, their fifth studio album. This one I like better than its predecessor as well. It also has the similar problems that the Virgin Killer had, in that it has stuff on the cover that's not as commercially accepted, or never was really. The overall sound of this album is similar to Virgin Killer. I just think overall it has better tracks on it. Some of the Let Me Go, So Leave My Life Alone. These are two really good tracks, probably the best two on the album, I think. And Leave My Life Alone is also one of the heavier tracks as well. A lot of good soloing and riffing. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, and I think it's even clearer sounding than its predecessors as well. So the production and the clarity of the album is gotten much better than it was initially. And I'm starting to sweat. It's kind of hot here today. So anyways, then there's a little bit more faster paced songs on this album too. You're starting to get that more speed sound to it. I never think of the Scorpions as a speed metal band, but for them, this was a little bit faster paced album. And of course, the band replaced Uli John Roth on this album because he didn't like the kind of commercial way in which the band was going. So he left to form his own band, and they replaced him with Matthias Jabs on the album. But I think he actually played on this album, and then Jabs just came in and played on the tour. I think that's how it worked. Could be wrong, though. Then you come to Love Drive, which is the 1979 album. They left at this point. They made the change. They left RCA and went to Mercury Records. They still kept the same Dieter Dirks as their producer. He produced like three. At this point, he was producing their fourth album for them. This is their sixth studio album. Michael Schenker then briefly rejoined the band. So they had three guitarists at one point doing this album. And at the end of the album, they decided to retain Michael Schenker. They thought he would be a bigger draw. I'm thinking that's what they thought. So they let Matthias Jabs go. But halfway through the tour, or towards the end of the tour, Michael Schenker then dropped the band and left again. And they called Matthias Jabs and gave him the job permanently. And he was with them. I think he's been with them ever since. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think he has been. This album has some. This album won that It won the Playboy's album cover of the year. I didn't even know they did such a thing, but it did win that. And the sleeve also won a award from, I believe it was Rolling Stones magazine. And this album kind of broke the U.S. market too. I think it was one of the first ones to really do well on the U.S. market. And it still has that classic heavy metal sound, but it's a little bit more commercial than the predecessors. Sound is much better as well. Animal Magnetism, the next album out of the gate. So that's this is their 7th studio album at this point. This album, another provocative cover. This is the one, I think, with the dog and the girl kneeling in front of a man who's got his back to the screen. Yeah, they like to do that kind of thing, these guys. It's a little bit more commercial sounding than its predecessor. Still has that heavy metal sound that's prominent with the Scorpions. It has that Scorpion sound. That's what I'm trying to think and say. Yeah, some heavy tracks. Don't Make No Promises. I like that track a lot. Really heavy. This was also the album where Matthias... sorry, I was going to say Matthias Jabs, but I meant to say Klaus Meine had throat surgery after this. He had problems with his throat. They weren't quite sure how that was going to work out for him. So on the next album, which was the Blackout album, which most people are familiar with, I think it's probably their most well-known album, they got Don Dokken in here to help with the vocals and assist Meine. But Meine actually came back, and he did very well and did most of the singing on the album, with Dokken doing some of the backing stuff, I believe. And this was before Don Dokken was part of the Dokken band, was well known. At this point, it was the biggest selling album for the group. No One Like You and Can't Live Without You are both on this album, two of their biggest hits. Some heavy tracks, Dynamite, China White, some real strong stuff on here. This album has the real classic kind of what people come to know as that Scorpion sound is dominant on this album. Also, they performed at the US Festival that year in front of 375,000 people on day 2. So that was a big, big thing for them. So we're going to go on to the last album that I put in with the heavy metal album. So for me, this is this era between In Trance and Love at First Sting. These are the heavy metal albums. Yeah, they do have some ballads and they do have some songs that maybe don't quite make it to that heavy metal status, but for the most part, I think of them as heavy metal albums. Love at First Sting is this album. It went double platinum. The big single, of course, is Rock You Like a Hurricane, which is on this album. I think the first track on the album is Bad Boys Running Wild is also a great track and also a heavy track too. Big City Nights is on this album, which is one of my favorite by them. Overall, I probably like this album the most of all the albums we've done up until this point. Really shows a consistency from these 7 albums. Each of them getting a little bit better production-wise and a little bit clearer sounding and solidifying that Scorpions metal sound. But they're just one great album after another, 7 in a row. And then after that, I think they kind of got a little too commercial, tried to come back a little bit later on, but for me, that is the part of the Scorpions that I wanted to talk about because that's the part I'm most familiar with. The stuff that came after Love at First Sting, I'm not as familiar with, so I decided I wasn't going to pursue that because I think it became a little bit more glam metal, and then they actually went to almost a ballad poppy sound for a while too. But I haven't listened to anything after Love at First Sting. Not at all, I don't think. Maybe this one album I have, I think I listened to it once. That's about it. So, for those of you who like classic heavy metal, which isn't really the same as what we listening to now with very different music. Some people would say that this is not really metal, that it might be classified as hard rock. Yeah, maybe, but the bands I classified as hard rock don't sound as heavy as these guys. So, if they're not hard rock and they're not heavy metal, what are they? So I decided for today that the Scorpions deserve to be a heavy metal band, and they may be my number 4 overall. So there you have it. This is my collection for today, the Scorpions on metal. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of them. I strongly recommend that you listen to the albums I talked about. At least give a couple of them a try if you want to try something that you haven't tried before. I think you'll find them a lot of pleasurable guitar stuff here, a lot of real heavy stuff here, a lot of classic kind of music here too as well. So please make your comments about the Scorpions below, and whether you like the new system or not too would be nice. And hit the like button and the subscribe button. It's much appreciated. And we'll be back next Tuesday night with What's New, a new album I'll be reviewing. And then the following week with another metal episode, which will feature a newer band from the last 10 years. So I hope to see you out for both of these, and have yourself a good evening. Goodbye.